Now we move into a session that I'm really excited about because I get to introduce the president of UNLV, Dr. Keith Whitfield. And as any of you may know, it's very difficult. The president is busy. They don't really give you a lot of time. And I'm so grateful that he's been willing to give us our time, give us his time to come and share with us. And I just want to start off with a really little story. About 3 weeks ago, I was contacted by the National Institute on Aging, and they're celebrating their 50th anniversary as an institute. And they, because I've received a lot of funding, career development award, and that kind of stuff, and they asked me, they said, we'd like you to do a little interview and tell us what are some moments that you are most proud of in your career. And there's two that I'd like to talk about. Both of them really involve Keith. And the first one was that about in December, I was invited for one of my primary mentors, Dr. James Jackson. They did a celebration of his life and his career at the University of Michigan. And of all people, they asked me to give a talk about the work that we have done together and his influence on sports. And if any of you know David Williams, who's like an unbelievable scholar, someone that I always look up to, I got to follow him. And I'm thinking to myself, how in the world did they ask me to speak about such an illuminary, James Jackson? But that came about because I went to James and I said, I want to do this work in the NFL and their studies. And he said, okay, I'm willing to mentor you. I'm willing to work with you, but I'm going to have you work directly with Dr. Keith Whitfield. And Dr. Whitfield poured so much into me. This conference would not be here. We would not have emerging scholars. We wouldn't have any of this if it wasn't for the gentleman that's going to come up right now. So I'm going to stop with that and just say you're in for a great treat, and I'm really looking forward to hearing him talk today. Dr. Whitfield.
Well, good morning. Well, I had to check. It is still morning. Okay. I only caught the last maybe 15 minutes of that last presentation, and there were some incredible things talked about. One of them is the idea of what is our base? You know, if we're going to talk about, we're going to extend it to thinking about athletes, what is our base? And one of the challenges is that we don't know enough about cognition in African Americans, period. So then in thinking about a subgroup, it becomes a little bit more challenging. You talked a lot about starting points, and there's lots of starting points that you could have. What I'm going to share with you today is a little bit about my career pathway. That's what Dr. Turner made me do. But I pulled a little fast one on him. I've got something at the very end where I want to talk just a little bit about actually studying Black cognition. I'm going to talk about career things first, but I want to talk about that at the end. So if you could bring up the first slide. So I want to explain that quote that's there, that he may be good, but he ain't no God. This came from a gentleman that we studied in Baltimore, in one of our studies in Baltimore, where we were asking him about how he was taking care of his health and even his mental health. And asked him what time, you know, when was the last time you went and saw a doctor? He's like, well, you know, and what did they tell you to do? And he said, well, you know. And I said, well, are you following what they said? And he said, well, you know, I try to do what he tells me to do, but, you know, he may be good, but he ain't no God. And I always listened to that and thought, you know, no matter what kinds of factors we think about and study, people's belief, I think the point that was made about mental health is critically important, because how you see how you take care of yourself and the kinds of things that you depend upon and what's part of the culture for African Americans is very, very important in terms of trying to decipher what you should be taking a look at. So today what I'm going to do is first talk about career path, preparing minority scholars in aging scholarship, then talk a little bit about my program of research, and then I'm going to sneak in a little piece about studying Black men's health. So I know that a lot of you are junior investigators just getting started, and so I wanted to tell you a little bit about my pathway. My pathway started quite humbly at the College of Santa Fe, where I got my BA. I got the opportunity to go to the Southwest Foundation for Biomedical Research in San Antonio, Texas, in between graduate and undergraduate. Then went to Texas Tech, um, was I always just like to say I wasn't the best of students. Now, I learned a lot, I did a lot, but I wasn't necessarily the best of students. And so when I came out, the only job that I got offered was a job at McNeese State University, which is a great opportunity to get started at. But once I was there, I realized I wanted to do more. So I actually got an opportunity to get on a minority supplement and went to the University of Colorado Boulder to learn how to do quantitative genetics. I want to make a point of saying I took a 25% pay cut to be able to do that. But interestingly enough, from having had that experience, I got recruited to go to Penn State. So sometimes sacrifice is actually worth it. From there, I went from assistant to full, went to Duke University and became a full professor. And I was sharing with a group last night. It was really funny because I'm like, I'm a full professor. You know, I know you're Duke University, but I'm a full professor. I can do whatever I want to do. I don't have to do anything else. I've proven myself I'm doing whatever I wanted to do. And one of the things that I hope you get from your colleagues that you're meeting here is that it was partly through a colleague that I met there where we really shared the energy about trying to kind of work against the machine and to try to write about African Americans, that I ended up being more productive at Duke than I had even been previously. After one of my what I thought was going to be my last grant, I got an opportunity to go into leadership and became a vice provost for academic affairs, went to Wayne State and became a provost and senior vice president for academic affairs. And then I landed here as the president of UNLV. Now, since we're talking about Black men, one of the things I think that a lot of you all think about is that you don't want to be the first. The problem is that if you're not the first, if there's not a first, there's no way you can be a second. So you've got to be willing to go out there a little bit and to stretch. Actually, I think Robert Turner did the same thing, that when he came to me and approached me about wanting to study cognition in Black men and particularly athletes, I was like, I don't think anybody's done that before. And Robert's Robert, you can see, charismatic guy, you're going to support him anyway. But it was just the idea of taking on that challenge that I wanted to be very supportive of him. But when you're the first, you remember it. I was the first PhD in experimental psychology at Texas Tech, first African-American postdoc at the Institute for Behavioral Genetics, the first Black faculty member in a new department called Biobehavioral Health at Penn State, first Black vice provost for academic affairs at Duke, first, I think, serving, because there was one person, but they were there for like 3 months, so I didn't count them. I was the first Black provost at Wayne State, and then the first Black provost at UNLV. So, hello. Our slides are stuck. There we go. So, in thinking about being the first, it's usually because you are trying to capitalize an opportunity. And for all of you all, you will have opportunities come, some big, some small. And the challenge is trying to figure out which one is the right one for you. There is a quote that I just absolutely love this quote. I love this quote particularly as the president of university because it's one of the reasons why I wanted to be at this university, because it allowed access to people that didn't necessarily fit the normal bill of what a college-going student might be. But that quote is opportunities are not distributed evenly, but talent is. And I believe in this 100% of that as I work with students. I had this interesting, charismatic guy that came to my office, said that he wanted to study Black men and study cognition in athletes. And I was like, something, I have no idea of whether he can do this or not. No idea. He showed me his CV. I was like, yeah, cool, but that doesn't show me any evidence of that. This is so long ago. I've known you for a minute. But I wanted to work with him, and I was invested in working with him because I believed that I didn't want to be the person not supporting him and not allowing him, and that he showed enough talent, truly, that I knew if I could help, if James Jackson could help, he could become the person that he has become today, which is an established researcher, getting to be an established researcher. We're not going to give you too much credit too early. But the challenge with opportunities is trying to find opportunities. A lot of you all have come here looking for opportunities, and I hope that you found them. It's also trying to figure out which ones are the right ones for you, and to also strike when the opportunity is there. Sometimes people want to just, well, let me think about it. And hey, it'll hit the road and that opportunity will be gone. So you have to think about it fast, make your decision, and then go forward. For me, opportunities came in terms of a postdoc to learn new approaches. It was weird and interesting of that the field of quantitative genetics actually has a very murky past in terms of some of the things that it's made in terms of assumptions about cognition and intelligence in African Americans. And so I struggled with a little bit to whether that was the way to go, but it was a great opportunity. I was able to use it and pivot. One of the things that I'll show you is that I've also done a study of Russian twins. Yeah. I can remember very clearly of getting on the plane to go to Moscow, Russia, back in 1994. And as I got on the plane, it finally hit me. I looked down the plane and saw no one of color, not one. Put my bag up, turned around, and then there was a black guy on the other side. And I was like, hey, man, I got to figure out how the heck did you get here? I don't, I'm trying to figure out how I got here. And he looked at me and I looked at him and he went, that just meant when we're in Moscow with, 3, 4, I forgot how many million people, I'll see you around. I also got an opportunity to go to Harvard for leadership training. And that was an interesting opportunity that I used in my own way. They taught a lot about psychology, and my background's in psychology. So I'm in this conference, I'm like, I know what you're trying to make me do. But what I did was to use the opportunity to find ways to really explore myself. It was 2 weeks of time that was focused on that. It's sometimes taking those opportunities and using them for even more than what they appear to be. Really, the way that most of this has happened for me is through mentorship. There we go. And here are just a few of my mentors. Mentors and role models. First and foremost is my father, Glenn Whitfield. I was born in Japan. I know you can see it from this side. I was born in Japan, and we left Japan so that my dad could come back to school at the University of Colorado Boulder to get his degree and become an officer. And that truly characterized my entire life. It directed me towards that. I thought about the University of Colorado and going to school, and that was an opportunity that one needed to have to be able to make opportunities to make their lives better. But people like John Beard, Jerry McLaren were intellectual folks who invested in me without much proof. And what's so fascinating about both of them is that these are not people that have a long history of mentoring African Americans. I think for both of them, I might have been the first. But there was never a time when they questioned who I was, what I was interested in, because I was always, even that was at Penn State, interested in studying African Americans. But they supported me. And when you can find people like that, man, you hold on to them, because they're few and far between. Then in the middle there is the famous James Jackson. If you don't know James Jackson, you do not know. If you don't know James Jackson's name, you don't know anything about Black aging, because basically between him and his mentor, Jackie Jackson, they're the ones who started all of it. Now, what's amazing is it's not that long ago in the course of history of academia, it's not that long ago that they started the work that they did. It was arguably in the 70s. But he was one who we had such a fascinating relationship. I think we're only on one paper together, maybe. But he always called me the biology guy. And I'm like, I'm not the biology guy, I'm a psychologist like you. And he always, because of the genetics piece of it. And one of the things that he mentioned to me shortly before he passed was that I had influenced him. And I was provost at Wayne State. Actually, he was a graduate of Wayne State. That's what was really interesting. I almost fell out of my chair. I said, how did I influence you? And he said, well, he goes, you had to tell me a few times, but that the genetics piece of it is important and how it fits in, and that he came along at a time when you talked about genetics in Blacks, it was never a good story. It was always something about inferiority. And I brought him to think a little bit differently about it. And so that piece, and James Jackson is the first African American in the history of GSA to get one of its highest awards, which is the Kleemeyer Award. And I think he got it maybe in the 90s. The second African-American to win the Kleemeyer Award happened in like 2018. And that was me. And to have been able to follow him, to be able to kind of do that, that's in my career, actually in 2018, I was like, nobody can tell me nothing now, okay? I'm like following in the footpaths of James Jackson clearly. You can't tell me nothing. But incredible person, incredible luminary. The other one that I'll put there is Freeman Hrabowski, who just retired. I'll just tell this one story because there's 1,000 stories I could tell about him. But I met him at the Harvard Leadership Institute. He was one of the last speakers, gave this incredible idea of how you could help to train and get more African Americans in STEM fields. And so, of course, every Black person that was at the meeting wanted to go up and meet him afterwards after his talk. I was in line. People would jump in front of me and cut me in line. I was like, you know, I'm going to let you do this a couple of times, then we're going to have trouble. So right as I'm getting up to him, somebody jumped in line again, and I'm just about to just clock the guy. And Freeman goes, excuse me, Keith was waiting. And I was like, how does he know my name? I'm in a group. And he goes, hi. And I said, hi, Dr. Hrabowski, you know, loved your talk. It's inspiring. And he says, well, you're at Duke, right? And I'm like, how does he know I'm at Duke? And he goes, you're a vice provost, right? And I'm like, how does he know all this? He had memorized everybody of about, I don't know how many were in the cohort. It was over 100. But he knew he could remember where you were. Amazing, amazing brain. And then he said something, and this is how our mentorship relationship started. He said, so you're vice provost? I said, yes, sir. And he said, so when are you going to be a president? My knees went out from underneath me. I had not, at that time, had any inkling, idea, or thought about becoming a president of a university. And this is what great mentors do. They help you to think about what you didn't think was possible. And those are very special mentors. There's, you know, you've got to go through some mentors before you can get to those kinds of mentors. And I've told him this, he retired last year, and I told him that story, and he just kind of laughed, and I said, I'm not laughing. I said, I'm going to blame you when I do everything wrong. But I hope that you all are able to find somebody who can do that piece of it. They need to give you reality, which he always gave me reality. But you need to be able to have somebody who's going to be able to encourage you. Sometimes to go better or farther than you ever thought about going and reaching. So now I want to talk a little bit about my research. I'm still thinking about you all as junior scholars. All of us were junior scholars at one point in time. Where did we start at? Where did we go? There we go. And so in terms of research, I heard this really incredible conversation that y'all had. I want to make sure that you take a step back and think almost in more elementary terms. You should be thinking about what kinds of questions you're going to ask, and then beat those questions to death. What is important? What is going to get to a truth that you're looking to try to find and identify? So, you know, sometimes the biggest issues are the ones that I talked about. And so when I was coming along, everyone told me that to study Black people, you had to study white people. And it's so funny, you laugh now, but it was completely assumed. I actually had my department head at the time come in, and when I said, I'm going to study African-American twins. And he said, well, you're going to study race differences. I said, no, I'm going to study African-American twins. And he was like, well, Julius Wilson, famous sociologist. He said, well, Julius Wilson told me, he used to live next to me, and he said that you had to. And I said, well, I don't have to do anything. And, got a little indignant about it. Even met with a famous gerontologist, and he questioned it as well. And what was so, life is interesting. 20 years later, no, more than 20 years later, when I was at Wayne State, he came up to me. I knew he was coming to give a talk. And so I, ran over and said hi. He had been a, outside peripheral sort of mentor. And he remembered telling me that I might be wrong in my approach. And he said, look at you now. He said, I was so dumb and I was wrong. And I was like, man, you're telling me all I need to know about you because you're big enough to know that you weren't right and that I proved, I proved to the contrary. So one of the big questions that I had was, in thinking about it, why is it that we think we have to make comparisons to understand blacks, when two, you don't really understand blacks from doing comparisons, you understand the difference. That's two different things. So I would go across the country, give talks, and had a number of faculty, usually not in the big group, but with individual, meetings I would have after my talk, and tell me I was wrong. And then I had students come up to me say that I really want to study black folks, but my committee won't let me. And what I figured out is that the committee was right, because it was the way in which they were actually presenting their question. You have to present the correct question. And so if you say, I want to know why blacks are different than whites, guess what? You're doing a comparison. If you say, I want to understand, from my perspective, the variability and what happens in the black community, then you can do a within group study, and it makes much more sense. So it's understanding the drivers of individual variability. And I got to tell you, Robert, I was blushing the other night. Who was the gentleman that was the keynote at dinner? Brian. He cited my paper. He had it up. Did you see it? I was like, oh, shock and awe that somebody read that paper. It is one of my more cited papers, but it takes you through trying to figure out. That's that Whitfield. See, I'm trying to give you all to do it too. Whitfield 2008, Journal of Gerontology. It's a rationale for why you need to be careful in making comparisons and why there is a benefit to studying within group. I know Lisa Barnes is here as well, and another incredibly important figure in who has advanced the study of cognition in African Americans. She actually had me come in and talk to her group because she was blue in the face talking to her group about, you can take this data and get twice as much out of it, because she has data that is designed to be comparative and just study within group, and to try to help that group from another perspective of talking about what the utility is of studying within group. So I'm supposed to tell you about my program of research. I believe everybody should do this. I think you should take out your little crayons and your paper, and everybody should do this, and which is to say, what is it that I'm interested in studying? Mine was individual differences in aging African Americans. And then, any graduate students in here? Yeah, okay, don't do what I did, okay? I was not focused enough. I had done some work on individuals, and then I had this additional training that was in studying twin and families. And those are two different ways in which you can study variability in a population. So, not being fearful enough, I actually took on both. So I have some data that's on individuals and some data that's on families. I have primary and secondary data analyses that I use. Primary is data that I collected. Secondary is what I do in terms of, like I say, getting by with a little help from my friends. And so borrowing data from other studies to be able to do the work that I did. I think that it is important. Let's go back. To look under family studies and under primary data, you see the adult Russian twin study. So people are like, well, wait a minute, individual difference in aging African Americans, why are you studying Russian twins? And what I figured out to be able to say about that is that what you'll see from a couple of examples I'm going to give you later on in this talk is that environment is critically important. Sometimes we go down the road of almost genetic determinism, and we think that genes are driving everything. Genes don't drive everything. Okay? It's an interplay between genes and environment on 10,000 different ways. We can have a long conversation about that, but you need to understand both. And so for Russia at the time, it had just really had the fall of communism, so as to say. And that was my ability to be able to go and see a place where the environment had changed in a dramatic, drastic way like no other. And so it was a great exercise. But those are the different studies that I've done. I'm going to talk a little bit here in a minute about the Carolina African American Twin Study of Aging. And I believe is my last one, is the study of longevity and stress in African Americans. We don't have time to talk about that, but it's another way, again, of taking a look and saying a lot of times we're talking about mortality in African Americans because we see earlier rates of mortality. This is a way to say you also see African Americans living into their hundreds, lots of them. And so what is that all about? Wish I had time to talk about it, but I don't think we do. So in terms of my program of research, I want you to take a look at the left-hand side of the slide. As you'll notice, there are groups of years when I'm tracking my publications, not single years. And I encourage everyone to do this. This it's called personal accountability, is that don't try to hide it, don't put it on your CV. I know for junior people, you will put papers in prep. Don't fool yourself. Until it's out there and under review, it's not real. You will be inflating what you think you're doing. And it's to make sure, usually, I know I did it, so that others think that you're busy and that you're really making progress. You can put it there, but boy, the real meat is when it's under review, because that means you've completed it and you're moving on to the next one. And prep means that you're still working on it. And unless somebody asks you for it, it's not really real to a lot of folks. As you will see, my productivity, again, in groups of years, was a little bit slower, but slowly but surely over time hit its stride. And even if you look and see the full professor in 2006, you go over and then you hit, I was vice provost. I was a administrator. And actually the one little outlier there was that, and it's funny because it's 18, it was 20 years after I had graduated. And I said, you know something? I should try to do 20 publications this year. Yeah, I heard it go, okay. And I'll get to it here in a second, but I told all my colleagues, I had a mass email and said, look, 20-year anniversary, I want 20 papers this year. And actually we did get 20. It was that 2 rolled over to the next year, because that's why it says 18. But I do want you to note that both as a provost and president, I've had publications. It might seem very impressive. It is. But moreover, what it demonstrates is this slide, this is an old one. Actually, there's some nodes to add to that. These are all the collaborations that I have of people on multiple papers. And so I've been able to continue to be productive, in part because I started my career in collaborating. For those of you who know me, for the most part, you can get my data. My data doesn't take, a review committee and submitting an abstract and all that. We'll talk. If, you look like you look crazy, I'll walk away. If you look like you're going to do something, I'll say, sure. And it's as easy as that. So I do it a lot for junior investigators. I do it a lot for colleagues who are trying to ask different sorts of questions. The twin study, for example, which is, I'm going to talk about it more here in just a second, but it ended in 2003. This is 2024. Last year, we got 2 publications off of it. But it was because it's part of now a group that is taking the data and harmonizing it. And because it's the only one of its kind, actually, I wasn't insulted. This group that works with it, I never go to their meetings, but they have all these meetings and they show me. And they were looking to see, could they get more current or recent data on African American twins? And I was like, oh, really? I'm not good enough for you. Okay, let's just see what you find. And sure enough, I think that there may be an effort. I hope that there is an effort. I don't want to be the only one that studies African American twins. But currently, they just gave up because I'm still the only game in town. Want to tell a little bit about research grants, because I know some of you all are junior professors moving through. One of the things that I would say is that supplements were critically important to my development. Minority supplements they're fairly easy to apply for. And the first one that I got was from NICHD, which is the National Institute for Child Health Development. And that allowed me to go do my postdoc at a 25% pay cut. And then I got the training, and then to be able to start my twin study, I actually got another supplement. I'm one of the few people, I've already let NIH know, so it's not a surprise. I've gotten 2 supplements. You're not supposed to get them. You're only supposed to get 1. I snuck in and got a couple more. But I've done others. I've got supplements for students that have helped, RO3s, and then those 3 big RO1s. The thing I will tell you about this, that I have no shame about, is that for each one of those, I had to apply 3 different times to be able to get the grants. So it's $1 million+ grants. That is to let you know, basically, you just can't give up, especially if you've got a good idea. Now, if they completely flesh it, which none of mine were completely fleshed, they just had lots of questions. Like the first one is the twin study. And they were like, well, we don't understand how he'll understand anything if he doesn't have a comparison group. So I had to write more and more. Now you see why the 2008 paper came out. This was, started in 97, but it was just this thing that kept reoccurring. And then other grants that have followed from that. I want to make sure, keep my eye on time, that I can get through all of this and that we have some time for questions if possible. But the supplements allowed me to be able to build skills, put me in a position to be recruited to Penn State University, and built my knowledge of Fortran programming. I don't know how to do it anymore, but I used to. From the ones from NIA gave me time and resources to be able to do pilot data collection, gave me time to refine my grant proposal, which subsequently got funded, and also allowed me to help students in terms of launching their careers. So back to my little program of research. And so I want to talk about one of the studies in particular, which is the Carolina African American Twin State of Aging. I don't know why Robert wanted me to talk about it, so I'm going to talk about it. But I want to take a step back and get you to think about genetic and environmental influences. This is the idea, and just follow with me in understanding this, that you have DNA, which transcribes to RNA, which creates proteins. Proteins create some of the behavioral phenotypes that we see in terms of neurotransmitters. And those phenotypes, then you have to consider them in an environmental field. For lots of genes are not necessarily fixed. Some of them turn on and off. Some of them work differently in different kinds of environments. And then you have to even think about how they're distributed differently across people. So it's very interesting. It's a very complex relationship before you get to some phenotype at the end that you want to study. And so using quantitative genetics, one can decompose genetic, shared environmental, and non-shared environmental influences. Genetics, of course, is pretty self-explanatory. Typically, what you do is just compare fraternal twins, the similarity between fraternal twins and identical twins. And then the shared environment is supposed to be the environment that comes from living within families. And when you study older people, a lot of that really reduces down, but some of it remains even into very late life. And then you have non-shared environmental influences, which when you're studying people in the same family, interestingly enough, it's why, think about your brothers and sisters. There's a lot of things that you're alike on, and there's some things you're completely different, like no one would even know that you're brother and sister, okay? That's those influences. So wanted to show you just for fun. Can you guys do me a favor?
And the beauty of it all is when the sun comes shining through to make those rainbows in my mind when I think of you sometime, and I want to spend some time with you, just the 2 of us. We can make it if we try, just the 2 of us. Just the 2 of us. Just the 2 of us. Building castles in the sky, just the 2 of us. You and I. We look for love, no time for tears. Wasted water's all that is, and it don't make no flowers grow.
These 2 are our oldest 2 male twins.
Good things might come to those who wait, but not for those who wait too late. We gotta go for all we know. Just the 2 of us. We can make it if we try. Just the
Now watch these 2 very carefully.
Just the 2 of us, building them castles in the sky. Just the 2.
It's so interesting. Actually, if you look at the oldest men, they have these these interesting, almost simultaneous behaviors they do, almost mirrored. The oldest ones did it, the ones before did it, and we didn't stretch the video enough, but if you saw the two who, one was a policeman and one was a fireman, that they both grabbed something on the side. It's very fascinating to see. So this is our twin study, Carolina African American Twin Study of Aging. When I do things, it's always as a team, so that I get to stand up here and always brag about it and talk about it, but there's lots of people that went into creating something that just had its 20th anniversary last year. So in CATSA, what we did and what we found was 285 twin pairs. I call them singletons and siblings. Twin people don't like the singleton piece of it, but what they are is surviving members of non-intact twin pairs. When you're studying African Americans, life expectancy and mortality is a reality. You have to write it into what you're thinking about and how you design things. And so rather than just getting both twins, if we found one member of a surviving member of a non-intact twin pair, we'd recruit them and interview them anyway. And if they had a sibling, we actually interviewed the sibling. It was done all throughout the state of North Carolina, but actually we went everywhere. We had interviews in Colorado, Detroit, Massachusetts, definitely in Virginia, and in Georgia. They were home interviews, and we looked at things like cardiovascular disease, memory, physical functioning, mental health, personality, and social factors. In the final sample, we ended up having 202 identical twins. These are individuals, not twin pairs. 364 fraternal twins. And this is a point I like to make about this. In many twin studies, what you find is more identical than fraternals. That is not how they distribute naturally. They distribute about like this, of that there are more fraternal twins than there are identical twins. Ours represents reality. And then we had singletons ending up having individual interviews of 706. I say that like that because that was a big deal at that time. But like I said, went lots of other places, but went all over the state of North Carolina, 23 different counties, both rural and urban. And I like to do this, this is more for your development. You might do it, you might not do it. I always like to make variable maps where I actually take a look and say, well, so what is all the things that we're studying? Our twin study has over 800 variables in it. And so I like to kind of, that's 800 individual variables. For a scale, if it has 20 items, we count all 20 items in that 800. But these are the different concepts that we had. The focus really was on health. But as you see, interestingly enough, we have a few good measures of cognition that are in that particular study that we have not utilized as much. In a twin approach, we've used them as individuals. And just some findings to share with you when we look at depression, when we look at TICS. TICS is the Telephone Information Cognitive Screening Task, which is a cognitive measure of impairment. It's one of the measures that we have that still shows a familial influence later in life. These twins ranged in age from 22 to 89. And then perceived stress and coping. That might seem obvious to you, that the black part is the environmental component and the red part is the genetic component, but it really had never been shown. And so what's interesting to me is yes, kind of confirms that environment is really important, but it's also critically important that a quarter or more of the variability that you find in twins in people is due to genetic influences. So our results suggest that health disparities are a family affair, that genes are associated with disease conditions, but are modified and constrained by the environment, and also that there's an intergenerational transfer of health that's evidenced by both genes and environmental and family influences. That's the last piece I really like to help people think about, in that as you look about even just hypertension since the 1950s, and you see, actually the slope's supposed to go this way, you see that it continues on. Well, why? Part of it is genes, part of it is the environmental things that happen, that occur. And some of those environmental things are both within families and also just in our natural environment. So, you guys went long on the last one, so I get to go long here. Okay. I'm watching, I'm before lunch, but I'm far enough before lunch that, you need to get your sandwich and hang on, I'm just about done. Let me talk about some important aspects of studying Black men's cognition. So first and foremost is to think about cognition. You all may have already done this. I mean, if Lisa Barnes was here, she probably has much nicer slides than mine. Mine are very simple. It's just the idea that this is the natural course of things when you study cognition, is that over time, across age groups, what you're going to have is that there's going to be a decline as you plot it out. The only thing is, and I've been talking about this over and over again about individual variability, when you take that same plot, look at how much variability you find. And from my perspective, then you ask, well, why? What drives somebody being up here versus down here and they're the same age? So it's not just age, it's some other things that are actually adding to why you find differences in people and their cognition. It's also critically important to study, I, for the most part, study normal cognitive aging. I wish I studied Alzheimer's disease, especially now. Last 4, 5, 6 years, the National Institute on Aging has doubled the amount of money that they give to Alzheimer's research, meaning you have a better chance of getting funded and bigger grants. Very exciting. But one of the other things that's changed, so I study, for the most part, the normal piece of it. We have done some stuff on MCI, which is mild cognitive impairment. It's the idea that, you know, whatever normal is supposed to be, that as we grow older, as time takes its toll, there are deficits that occur linked to physical functioning and other sorts of things that we can say, but we don't think about it as dementia yet. And then there's a point in time when you get to that point of clinically being diagnosed, being considered being demented. And so one has to think about that in the background. Let's skip that one. One of the things that I want you to think about that's incredibly important, we've been talking about it in lots of different veins in this conference, is the idea of stress. And I went and found this. I forgot where I found it at. It's from the Center for Equitable Growth and something else, but is looking at the differences between blacks and whites. And what you see is that when you look at stress, there's truly a differential that goes on. You know, not trying to go through too much of it, but basically what you see is that stress is related. You know, stress isn't just something that has mental health implications for it. It also has physical health implications for it. It is almost a nuisance for looking at cardiovascular disease, diabetes, for stroke, for all of those different kinds of chronic conditions. It is one of those factors that plays into the rates that you see, the exacerbation of the course of those diseases. So it's critically important. In our study of longevity, that's one of our main premises, is that it's probably stress that is cutting people out early and not allowing them to be able to live longer. But what's interesting is that you find some people who are living, we have some people who are in their hundreds, who are living long lives, and they do report, you know, a reasonable amount of stress. But I can tell you right now, for the most part, they tend to be lower. So that stress is this factor that actually does kill people. This is a little path. I think we're just about done here. In terms of studying Black men, most of my stuff, sometimes we control for it, and sometimes we don't even control for it, which this conference, work of Robert and others, have made me think, boy, that's a whole nother set of analyses that we should be doing. We have done one looking at health status, and particularly, and I think it's relevant for this group, it actually finds that lung function is critically important for variability, accounting for variability in cognitive function. We measure it with peak expiratory flow. It's not the best one, but it's pretty good. And it clearly shows itself to be a factor. I use it now in every single study that we've had because we've shown it to be an interesting and important factor. But I throw this up as just a conceptual model of things that one might end up trying to study. The discrimination piece is a piece that I typically don't have in my studies, but I've got it in our longevity study, and we may circle back around and do that. Actually, one of your other participants in this study, who's Roland Thorpe, is my co-investigator on the longitudinal study, or the longevity study. And that's the one where we're going to be pulling out some of these other factors that both influence cognition, but also influence longevity. So that's just something to think about. I don't know if it's been a psychologist or what, but I like drawing pictures. If I'm trying to think through something, I'm going to draw a picture of how I think things are related. And this is just one stab or stretch at that. These are factors that we found when we look at cognition when not considering specific gender, but it would be interesting to look at it within men and see how these same things play out. So one last point is about cognitive reserve. Sometimes we think about only the people and decline. And I think even as people were talking about different issues that may be related for athletes, Cognitive reserve is an interesting consideration or framework to think about. And that is that there are things that actually can reduce cognitive functioning, things like poor lung function or high blood pressure. And there's things that are protective, like education and social support. And so one needs to think about those as they're thinking about cognition in African-American men as well. So what's missing in many of the efforts to understand Black men's cognition? There's only a couple papers out there. We have one of them that are on studying Black men's cognition. So I encourage all of you all, find some data and do it. You know, it would be very interesting to see. But one is make sure that you're understanding more than differences. This is this between and within group piece. Another one is thinking about the biobehavioral origins and differences and conditions, how biology, social, behavioral actually interact with each other and maybe are constrained or stratified differently across gender. Be an interesting question to ask. And that physical, cultural, emotional barriers to access to care. That was talked about in the last piece just at the end about making sure that we study people shortly after physical events to see if we can take a look at them. And Jeff Cummings, who, as you see, is absolutely brilliant, is the idea of using biomarkers to be able to do that. We can get biomarkers that basically, you know, if you can get them after an actual incident, you can assess the damage, the impact that incident has on the body through looking at biomarkers. But you also need to think about things that can help you in terms of tailoring interventions. You know, the goal needs to be is that once we understand more about cognitive aging, particularly in African-American men, what kinds of interventions can we make to be able to make their health better? That's understanding language, culture, history, and the environmental factors like housing, employment, and political issues. To be able to understand how all of those things go, those are the more impactful, useful sorts of interventions that ultimately get made. So with that, I am done. You see, I'm always trying to push the Whitfield 2008 paper. It's up there. You can copy the citation to make sure that you get the citation correctly. Take a read through. It even talks about statistics and power analysis, which really, once you see it, a lot of the studies that are done that are between group studies have like 10% Black in them. It's not sufficient. It's not sufficient statistical power even to be doing those things. So we do a good job of that. Want to leave you with a few more of our glamour photos of our twins. But with that, I hope we've got enough time for some questions, and thank you very much.
All right. Give it up. All right, you got to give it up for him. Okay, so I was going to have a 15-minute Q&A, just you and I, but in fairness, we got to stay at least somewhat on our schedule. So what I want to do, I know there's probably a lot of questions, but I'm going to reserve the opportunity for two of our emerging scholars, anyone out there that wants to have a question, because it's not often do you have the opportunity to ask a question to a Black man who is a president of a major university. So I really want you and our emerging scholars opportunity to take advantage of this. Hands back there, please. Stand on up so she knows where to find you.
I think it's afternoon. Good afternoon, Dr. Whitfield. My name is Sean. I'm from the University of Texas at Austin, assistant professor. My question to you is, I wrote it down, I had to be specific. Based on your research experience, how significant is communication in understanding the severity of cognitive aging that has been shared amongst the participants you interacted with or throughout the years of your work?
So I'll be honest with you. I've done that well and I've done it poorly. In Baltimore, we really took on the opportunity to do that. We created a newsletter. You know, so for most of us, we're not journalists. So trying to do something where you give information back, which is critically important. We did it a little bit better there than we've done it in our other studies. We had a newsletter we called Our Story. And one of the things that I love, I found these little quote things. And one of them that I try to use in my everyday life actually is, count your blessings, not your crosses, count your wins, not your losses. And what's fascinating about it is, and it shows what you have to be careful is that, so I did it, you know, funding kind of comes and goes. If I showed you the stuff in Baltimore, I was there for 14 years, but it wasn't one study. It was actually multiple studies that we did, little piece, little piece, little piece. And we communicated out to them. You never get feedback back really. But when I stopped doing it, that's when we got feedback of saying, well, where is my newsletter? I have moved recently. Has it just not shown up? And people a little indignant. So we had to start it again. So it's one of those things that it is good and it's important to do. Just take it on and understand that it is a responsibility. And I think it's a bit of responsibility anyway. And I would say that that's one thing I've not done well across my career, is be able to give as much feedback back as possible. I would give kind of summaries at the end. And oftentimes, like I think of what it does with you all, is that sometimes getting the information about what happened or what the results are does nothing but lead you to more questions. And so it's a responsibility that needs to be done. Maybe I'll do that in retirement someday, is to just write about all the things that we found across the Carolina African American Twin State of Aging, the Baltimore study of Black aging, and the stress, the study of stress in African American families, or something like that, our SALSA study. We've interviewed about 4,000 people. Now, it's across a bunch of studies, but there's things that are interesting to be able to share, and I keep, you have to keep them secret, because you can't tie their social security number with their address, but I keep their addresses. And so my goal is someday is that maybe we'll do that. Or maybe we'll just put it out on the web to say, hey, here's a way to be able to share some of what we've learned about African American aging, and cite the Whitfield 2008 paper. But it's an important thing, in particular if you're getting started. I think when we started in Baltimore in particular, that was one way that we got credibility, is that we were sharing back information with the people that we were interested in studying.
Thank you. One more for our scholar. We have any more scholars there that have their hands up? I see one over there.
Good morning. My name is Talia Bragg. I'm a postdoctoral fellow at the Boston University School of Medicine. And I just wanted to say, President Whitfield, to hear you talk about your legacy in research in Black History Month is very affirming for me. And also, as a side note to mentorship, the lineage continues because Dr. Turner is one of my mentors. My question is, and we heard Dr. Barnes yesterday talk about her strategy for community engagement and recruitment, and I was wondering if you could share about yours.
It's so interesting, because Dr. Barnes and I have had this conversation, because I think when we were getting started, although I'm senior to her, she's still young and smart. I'm old and grizzled. One of the things is really engaging folks in a way that makes sense to them, and actually engage them where they're at. She shared with her study, she can do it much better than I can, but I've always been a big fan of what she did, because some of the work that was being done there before was not including Black people. And you kind of wonder, you're like, Chicago, how the heck haven't they swung a dead cat and got Black people? And one of the ways in which she did it is the same way we started in our work in Baltimore, was that we actually went to community leaders. I went through the United Way, because United Way had one of the most extensive networks. And they were like my Sherpa. They did the heavy lifting to make it so that I wasn't somebody new. Actually, they liked it that I was new. That's what was really, really interesting. Compare and contrast the work that Dr. Barnes does, that because I wasn't from Baltimore and that I didn't connect myself, with all due respect, my great colleague, Roland Thorpe, I wasn't with Hopkins, that I didn't raise as much suspicion as to why I was doing what I was doing. And I do want to tell you the other interesting fact is that, at the time I was fairly young, spitting fire, really excited. I know all the statistics on, health disparities, and I know all of this stuff. And so I did a little kind of survey, and then did some focus groups. And I asked the question, what's the biggest health problem facing African Americans? What do you think they said? If you know the data, it's cardiovascular disease. Yeah, takes you out. That's not what they said. I was like, how can that be? How can that be? So I asked them, I said, so, you said something else. Why is it this other thing? And what they said it was cancer. And I asked them, so why is that? I'm looking at rate of cancer. Yeah, it's a serious issue, particularly certain forms of cancer, but why? And they said, because it takes away who you are. So as you studying people that live in enclaves of older African Americans, they see each other. They see what's going on. They know their friends. And when they have cancer and you see what happens with chemo, it looks like it takes away who you are. And it was just critically important as you're thinking about, as they were thinking about aging, of that here was something, a factor that was taking away who you were. And that's why they thought it was the biggest health problem. So to your point, to your question, I think that it's very important. That to me was, I try not to take it for granted that you know all of it. We, as you saw from the twin study even, we had a piece that is not done, no qualitative researcher would like the data that we have, but we would have little post interviews. Once we did our structural interview, we did post interviews and just said, talk to us about what you did. And we'd find old pictures of when they were younger. One twin pair. It's fascinating. So, and I'll stop here, I promise. I've been in stories the last 2 or 3 days, and so I'm just doing nothing but telling stories. But let me tell this one story. So it's kind of about genes and environment, and even the power of environment. So these two twins, identical twins, one was born, and when they were born, they were blue. Lack of oxygen. And back in those days, midwife took the baby, said, sorry, baby didn't make it. Takes the baby and puts the baby, I just remember this so clearly, on the windowsill. She goes back, says, you got another baby, let's work with it. Baby comes out, baby's healthy, mother's very happy, but the mother looks over and sees the other baby and says, can you do something about my other child? Midwife goes over to basically remove the child. The child's alive. And I'm sure she was just mortified. Midwives were very, very prominent. This is back in probably the 1940s, 1950s. And so they both survived. And interesting enough, when they turned about 10 or 11, the mother passed away. And one of the things in my program of research, you'll see that I worked with the Swedish Adoption Twin Study of Aging and also the Minnesota Twin Study of Aging. These were ones that had not only twins that were raised in the same family, but also were adopted away. And they found them and would compare them. And it's a powerful assessment of the environment. For African Americans, 40s, 50s, 60s, the adoption away happened within families. And so in this particular one, when the mother passed away, the one who was thought to have been sickly, because everybody knew about their little story, they ended up keeping him in North Carolina, and the other twin, because everybody couldn't take 2 kids, got put, and nothing bad, just in case, just if you're from there, went to Philadelphia. And now in later life, the one who's in North Carolina runs quasi-marathons. The one in Philadelphia had left ventricular hypertrophy and a bunch of other health things. And they used to talk about that, how can that be? We're identical. And I said, yeah, but you were raised in 2 different places. And so, and we find differences within twins anyway, but it is a pretty dramatic example of how environment may play a huge role in the health that we have over time. So learning those stories gives me great stories to be able to share with you.
Can we give it up, please? All right, now I'm going to ask my colleagues to come up to the stage. We're going to ask President Whitfield to stand here in the middle, and we would like to honor you, sir. I'm going to turn the mic over to Monica.
I think you should do this one, Dr. Turner. Yes, I'm very sure. Well, first of all, let me just say, on behalf of the Black Men's Brain Health Project, our initiative, we are so grateful to have you here, your generosity of time, to have a university president here this much time sharing his wisdom, his insight with you. It's unbelievable. And I was just commenting on that. So thank you so much for being here with us and being so kind. And now I'm going to very humbly give you the mic. I'll hold this.
All right. So there's so much that I can say, and we don't have time. So much that I want to say, but most of all, I can say this for sure, because I've had lots of conversation with these folks. There are a number of scholars like myself who owe a debt of gratitude to you. There is a program, just as an example, is a program that he started. We had a writing kind of workshop. Every week, Dr. Whitfield, President Whitfield, would leave his office, come in a conference room there at Duke, and he'd had 4 of us. And he said, you're gonna write for an hour, hour and a half. He bought a book, taught us how to write, make sure that we were continuing to write. Because he was saying to us, we gotta teach you how to research, but you gotta publish. He even said to me, I got you these grants, we're working together, but I wanna know what kind of publications we're gonna have together. And I wanna remind you, we have 4 publications with you, myself, and Dr. Jackson on there. So there's more than you think. Right, but I just want to say on behalf of myself and all of us here, just how grateful and wonderful I feel for having you do all the things that you do for us collectively. So thank you. Yeah.
You give it to him. That's right.
Where's the camera?
Where's the camera? I need that camera. All right.
Thank you very much.
I'm a university president and faculty member, so I always have something else to say. One of the reasons why I am over the top that you all are here is because I'm always looking for who the next generation of scholars is going to be. And that it gives me infinite pride that someone who I had a small part to play in his development has actually passed on the baton. But I will say, now you all have the responsibility of both establishing yourself, as Robert has, and passing on the baton. So understand that it is each of your responsibility. Take it very seriously, and just understand it's a lot of fun too. So thank you very much. Glad you're here at UNLV. This is a great university. I get paid to say that. But it's a great university, and I hope that you're enjoying and having this moment in time to be able to actually explore your thoughts, your ideas, and even more importantly, I kept showing you from my little social slide, it's being able to connect with colleagues, and that's actually, there's productivity comes from it, and it's fun. So it's a good approach to use. Good luck with your careers. Reach out to me if I can help. I'll try to help all that I can. Thank you very much.